Thank you all for coming this evening. My colleague Mairead and I are very pleased to see all of you. You may be wondering why we're doing an event around AI and French tech at a place called All Turtles, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But it's really fun for me personally to see all of you, and I think Mairead has something to say as well.
Yeah, no. So at SVB, we're trying to really focus in on different subsectors, make sure that we're developing our own opinions and really understanding what's happening in important verticals. So AI is definitely a big focus for us. For enterprise software, it's actually our largest growing niche. Last year it was more than 15% when we have roughly 18 different categories it could fall under, so it's by far our fastest growing. So we're excited to learn some tonight and happy that you all can make it.
So yeah, Mairead and I are focused on AI at SVB, and Emma and I, who are in the audience, are focused on the French tech ecosystem. And just to start off this evening, I thought I would pass the mic to Phil and to Reza first to chat a little bit about why the three of us are doing this. So why is All Turtles interested in France, and why is France interested in AI? So
I got a mic, but thank you. I mean, the short answer to why I'm doing this is because I do what my calendar tells me, and this morning it said French Tech AI event, so here I am. Yeah, you gotta, once you commit to doing what the robot overlords tell you, you just gotta be all in and not question it. But we are super interested in France. So at All Turtles, we make AI products, in particular types of AI products. We call them practical AI, meaning we don't do any deep tech, we don't do anything mysterious. We try to apply new AI technologies to solving like worthwhile problems that are worth solving. And we wanted to do it globally, everywhere in the world, not just in Silicon Valley. So we started in San Francisco, Paris, and Tokyo, because two of those are my favorite cities in the world, and I live in San Francisco. And we're basically looking for places that have really sharp talent. So I think Paris, France in general, Paris in particular, is just this amazing culture of design, of innovation, of good taste. There's just lots of sharply talented people, and we want those people to be making AI products for us. So we are proud to be a part of the French tech ecosystem. And thank you for setting this up.
So first, Phil, thank you for hosting us. And we're very pleased to be here. Actually, I love the fact that you're running stuff in Tokyo, Paris, and San Francisco. It's probably the three best foodie places in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, when I was at Evernote before this, and our headquarters in Europe for Evernote was in Zurich, and it was the only location we had that wasn't optimized for the quality of the food, and we decided not to make that mistake again at All Turtles. So we said, now it's going to be Paris as the European hub.
Exactly. So, I represent the French tech tonight, and we're usually very pleased as French people to be associated with great food and great wine. But I think we're also very pleased to be associated with great talent when it comes to technology. And I think that France has a lot to offer. We have a lot of great schools that deliver amazing education, in particular around math and engineering. And so we tend to have a great number of great talents. And if you look today at a lot of international companies like Facebook or Google, a number of the AI researchers or the heads of AI labs are actually French nationals. So as the French tech, we're always pleased to see that and to put that forward, because we aim to somehow put forward the French label and basically help with the brand of France, which usually needs it a lot when you look at the strikes on the other end. So we think there's a lot of positives that we have to put forward. So that's kind of our involvement, and thank you very much for being here tonight.
Excellent. Maybe we can start by having the panelists give a brief introduction, and then I'll hand it off to you, Reza. But for those of you who don't know Reza, I doubt that there are any of you who don't, but he is a GP at Partech, which is a French US fund, and he is also the head of French tech here in San Francisco. So thanks for moderating tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Joanne. I'm a partner at Foundation Capital. So we're a 23-year-old venture firm, 250 investments, 27 IPOs, Netflix, Lending Club, Mobile Iron, and a whole bunch of others. And I've been investing here for about 5 years. I have 6 investments. Most of them are applications of AI, and today they range between a couple hundred K in ARR to 130 million-ish in revenues. So a whole range of companies. I'm probably the black sheep in this room. I actually grew up in French Canada. And whenever I tell French people this, they're like, oh my God, we can't be friends. I'm so sorry. It's not my fault. So it's really nice to meet you guys, and very excited to be here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Malekzadeh Levy. I think there might be quite a few Canadians here tonight as well. I'm also Canadian.
But not French Canadian.
But not, sadly, not French Canadian, though I enjoy poutine as much as anyone. I'm from Silicon Valley Bank. I'm the chief scientist at the bank, which in our case means I run our AI and machine learning team. So my background is I've been very fortunate to be around and involved in various ways with a number of scientific and research-focused companies, and a through line between a lot of them has been the use of machine learning and AI to solve interesting problems in science and research. And now I'm taking some of that experience and applying it to all of the really interesting data that we have at SVB about thousands and thousands of startups and venture funds, and using that to make predictions about the future of people and organizations in those categories. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm MayC Huang. I'm the early stage investor at Charles River Ventures, or CRV, based out here in San Francisco. We do primarily enterprise and consumer early stage investing of our 17th fund now with 600 million capital. My French connection, besides the fact that I love France, is that we actually have a French entrepreneur in our portfolio for the investor in Concord, if you guys are familiar with that in the contract management space. And I focus primarily on AI and machine learning, which is why I'm here. My background's in math and statistics. I used to work for a fund called Data Collective. It's also focused on big data and AI.
Hi, I'm Sam Levan from Madkudu, CEO and co-founder. We do demand gen in a predictive way. Can you tell where I'm from? So yeah, very French. I've been studying like what's called statistics at the time, not machine learning, not AI, and I've been applying it in the past 15 years in every fields. A lot of personal domain in my life. That's how I bought my cars. That's how I picked the school for my kids. That's not how I met my wife. Yeah, practicing AI like every single day, building companies and a core product around it. I have a lot of dirty stories about what has worked and what hasn't worked beyond the hype, so I'm looking forward to that.
Great, thank you all for being here with us. I'm pleased we have a good mix of various profiles here. But Phil, maybe we can start with you. Obviously, every slide deck I think I've seen in any type of segment has the word AI in it lately. So it seems like it's very broad and all-encompassing, and if you don't have AI somewhere in your slide deck, you've kind of missed the buzzword bingo. And you've had, in the past, compared AI to either a sheepdog, as in it's very good when it's super narrowly defined, or to fire. It's inherently good or bad, not inherently good or bad, but super powerful. So how would you define it for us tonight? What new metaphor would you have? And maybe also, what led you to actually create All Turtles, if you don't mind touching on that as well?
Sure. So kind of a new metaphor on demand is what you're asking for?
First question.
I'm going to kill time by explaining the other two metaphors and giving me some time to think of a new one. I think when I compared AI to like a sheepdog, it was in the context of, I think, a lot of people, a lot of companies try to make AI have human-like personalities, anthropomorphic personalities, and I generally think that's just a mistake. It's a bad experience. It's unnecessary for anything, and so we prefer to, if it's going to have a personality, to think of the personality to be like a service animal, like a sheepdog or something. The idea being that a sheepdog or a police dog or something like that, it's really smart. It's amazingly good at its job, much better than a person could be, at doing its thing. The sheepdog is kind of a genius at herding sheep. And it can have a personality, it could be approachable, it could be cuddly, you could form an emotional bond to it, but you don't perceive it as being human-like in any way. You don't try to trip it up because it can't tell you a joke and go, aha, you're a dumb sheepdog. So the idea is when we're designing personalities or voices, we try to make them more like a really smart animal, or just a tool. in general sense. Instead of this myth that somehow AI should be artificial people, which I think just leads to all sorts of bad problems and is frankly just sloppy design. About Fire, I don't think Fire is neither good or bad. I think on balance, Fire is pretty good, right? I don't think most people would be like, take it or leave it. Like maybe we could do without Fire. So yeah, I think AI is like that. Like yeah, it also has the potential to, do some damage and to burn you. But I think in a few decades, we're going to be pretty happy that we had this technology. I think it's going to be overwhelmingly used for good. Although some caution is necessary, just like it is with Fire. A new metaphor that I've been playing around with that actually Jessica, my co-founder here at Alters, and I've been discussing a lot, is this idea that I think a lot of people make the mistake, this kind of Hollywood mistake, that the purpose of AI is to make a computer feel like a human. But really, the purpose of a well-designed AI system is not to make a computer feel like a human, it's to make the user feel like a human. It's to understand the user well enough so that when you're interacting with it, you feel like you have a sense of humanity, a sense of dignity restored, so that it's not up to you to understand the bureaucracy and the hoops to jump through to use the system, so that the system actually understands you, to kind of make you feel human instead of the other way around. And I think with that as a design principle, I think you can make some pretty cool things. The reason that we started All Turtles, me and Jessica and our other co-founder John, who is not here right now, a few other people, is because we wanted to make high-impact products with as little bullshit as possible. And after, I've spent about 23 years as a startup founder and CEO, and as a VC, as an investor, and I've just, each one of those years accumulated a little bit of insight into just how much bullshit there is in the system. And we thought we could do it better, and we haven't been proven wrong yet.
Okay, cool. So then maybe I'll jump on that for MayC or Joanne, for you two. As investors, how do you make out the bullshit from the rest as you're looking in this space and people come to see you with AI projects? You hold the mic, so go first.
Good question. I think a lot of it, might be cliche to say, but in early stage investing, you're really betting on the team, and it just comes back to what is the expertise and passion of the team. Do they have the ability to kind of execute in the space? Do they understand the problem from the perspective of the customer deeply? We're actually, I would say at CRV, we take a very kind of product-focused approach as well. We really like to see that, founder that's focused on product. And, example would be when we invested in the Series A for a company called Airtable, which some of you guys might be familiar with, might be users of. They were actually pre-revenue at the time, and they were very much focused on just iterating on product, and were obsessed with kind of customer love for a product, and had a lot of this kind of more bottoms-up, customer and consumer adoption of the product before really selling into enterprises and kind of gaining revenue from that standpoint. So, I think, one thing to just suss out when separating kind of the BS is how much do people really love the product, and how much does the founder really feel that problem, and kind of diligence it that way.
Great question. So I think for me, I like it when founders don't talk about AI in general, right? For most cases. If they do talk about AI, then I want to understand, why is it that they're talking about AI specifically, as in why now? And if you look at the history of AI research, right? I studied computer science a long time ago, and nobody cared about AI at that time. My father studied AI, although it wasn't called that, it was called optimization. And that wasn't really sexy back then either, right? So for someone to talk about AI as a differentiation, I want to understand why it is that it's interesting today. Reasons for that, it could be that the technology is fairly recent, that came out of academic research. You could say vision is a relatively recent technology, NLP to some extent, deep learning to some extent. And it could be technologies that are still not very stable or commercializable for whatever reasons, but could be in the next few years. So if it's in that bucket, I love to hear about it. I want to understand the risks. If it's not in that bucket, which is the majority of the companies I look at, then I want to understand the pain points, the solutions, the use cases. that has nothing to do with this tool set.
Got it. So basically, everything you described here is the usual ways of looking at a company. So you just basically take the buzzword AI out, and then you try to look at things. So for you then, Sam, being on the other side and having to show or pitch these people and try to show what you have, how did you effectively communicate the true capabilities of your product without using AI as a buzzword? Or how do you explain what you do?
Yeah, I don't talk much about AI. At least I start very much with the people we solve a problem for, because I mean AI has a purpose. It's just a tool. And what's interesting is when you look at the problems people have, then the questions, you can lead to the question of you cannot solve it with the traditional business rules. Today, the world is being automated, and it's being automated with if this, then that. And that works at the beginning, but you get quickly to a point where it's a pain for people, and it's a pain for the people who make those systems. So leading to that problems and then showing concretely why AI is solving that very specific problem that exists today is, I think, a follow-up is not what we start with.
Got it. So, Alex, on your side, you're the chief scientist at SVB. You guys are a humongous organization that's not your core business, developing technology or doing AI. So how do you actually do something with an SVB, and how do you build consensus on the technology you want to use?
It's a great question. Okay, so, obviously Silicon Valley Bank is not an artificial intelligence company. I mean, it's a bank. I mean, it's in the name, right? However, to the point that sort of we heard from my colleagues in the intro, AI is transforming numerous industries, and we can see it in our clients' hands that it is making them incredibly successful and often incredibly wealthy. And when you see people adopting a technology every single day as the largest growth group of companies that we serve, at some point you sort of sit up and take notice and think, well, maybe this could apply to us as well as to the problems they're working on. So that's sort of the high-level premise for why did we even get interested in this. Mm-hmm. But then the more detailed premise is the following. So first of all, here's some things to know about SVB. Number one, SVB banks the majority of Series A and later companies in the US. And number two, SVB banks a very large majority of the top VC funds. What's interesting about that is it means that we've had a view for many, many years into the histories of thousands of companies. And so oftentimes when you think about what folks do when they have a venture investing hat on or an advisory hat on, they think about the companies they've been exposed to, and they try to make a prediction about your company, right? So let's say you've had a really long career and you've seen up close maybe a few hundred companies. Maybe like it's been an insane career, it's been like 1,000 companies. But SVB's seen 100,000 companies. So where AI and machine learning comes in is what if you could study the stories and the histories of those 100,000 companies as a whole, look back on that archaeological record of 30 years of all of these startups, some have succeeded, some have failed, and look at all of the different variables that might affect that at least we have some visibility into. What could you do to turn that into machine learning models that make predictions about startups and venture capital funds in the future? And if those predictions are good enough, what could you do with that? Well, one is you could advise people on how to build more successful businesses, how to build more successful funds, and you can also make decisions yourself in terms of lending and investing and other predictions about where these companies are going. So that's what I do at SVB and how we see trying to take this unique resource and use it to derive insights and predictions about the future in a way that probably nobody else in the market can, even though we're not an AI company, we're a bank.
So Phil, maybe at the risk of being slightly controversial, you don't have all this back-end data and information that they have, yet you're trying to bet on some new projects around AI. So how do you go about figuring out what's interesting, what's going to be interesting, and what you want to go and help build?
So we're not actually trying to place bets, right? We're not trying to optimize for what's going to be successful. We have a pretty specific filter. We're looking for what can make an impact. So we specifically want to work on, we've kind of been starting to think about these as the monsters hiding in plain sight, like the problems that everyone kind of knows about and acknowledges, but for some reason the whole world isn't rushing out to solve these problems. And we say, okay, well, which of these problems can we make an impact on in a way that would have been impossible a few years ago because the tech stack wasn't there? So what can the new technology let us do for the first time in a mainstream way that just would have been radically harder before?
And everything has to solve a real problem. Everything has to be something that can stand on its own, that's scalable. There's no mystery business models, very specific timing in terms of how long we will work on something. We only want to work on things that we can get to market within 12 to 18 months. So it's a pretty specific filter about the kinds of problems. But the world is like such that the more specific a filter you have, the more things you find to work on, just because of the kind of the clarity of saying this is what we look at brings all sorts of things into focus. So the first product that we built and shipped is a product called Spot. We actually have Jessica and Julia. So Dr. Shaw is in from London. Did you just get in like an hour ago or something? Is a psychologist from London who helped us develop this whole technique for doing workplace harassment and discrimination reporting, which we automated. Jessica is the CEO of the project. It's a tool for solving the very specific problem that the vast majority of workplace harassment and discrimination goes unreported, because reporting it sucks for the person who's experienced or witnessed the harassment, as well as for the companies. No one really knows how to do it. People are really bad at being on both sides of that. So we build an AI to solve that problem in a way that, had we tried building it 5 years ago, the AI would have been the hard part. But now, frankly, it's mostly off the shelf. It's nicely customized off-the-shelf technology. So what we've now done is actually just added the deep experience in the psychology of it, the product design, what customers actually want to solve a real problem. And several of our products, we have 5 more that are due to come out over the next year. They all have that filter. They all solve a specific, well-articulated, crisply articulated, acutely felt problem in a way that just would have been infinitely harder a few years ago, mostly because of the AI technologies that got developed between now and then. And all of these things are things that, like, none of them are surprising. They're all things that were like, as soon as we describe it, everyone kind of says, yeah, that's obviously a problem. Like, there's nothing that hasn't been there lurking in plain sight for decades.
Hey, Reza, can I add something about how to sort out the bullshit AI companies from the rest? Is that okay, before we get too far off that? I do an internal presentation at SVB called 7 Questions to Ask Your AI Entrepreneur. It's sort of like almost like a BuzzFeed list of questions that you might go through. The main theory of it, and I won't list all 7, but the main theory is there are some sets of questions that you can ask an expert in an area, and if they really are an expert, and if what they're doing is real, they should be able to answer some set of reasonable questions very crisply, clearly, and non-defensively.
Okay, hit me with the questions.
I'm going to give you one example, and I actually might use Spot as the case study of success on this category, because Julie and I talked briefly beforehand. Okay. So one question that's on the 7 is, how do you benchmark in quantitative terms how your model is performing? In other words, how do you know if it's getting better or worse than it was last week? And how do you know if it's better or worse than an incumbent method for doing this? So when I was talking to Julia just briefly before the start of this at Spot, I was talking briefly about this, and she gave this example of there's a number of different ways that you can take an interview in a harassment report, and how she benchmarked against those. And that answers that question. What you'll often notice is folks that have something that's maybe a little more hand-wavy, they actually can't clearly explain how they know if their model is getting better or worse. That's just one of the 7. I mean, do you want to take that one on for?
Yeah, my answer to that is ask Julia. So
I thought you gave a great answer.
Yeah.
So that would be.
I mean, if she weren't around, I would have said, we use the blockchain.
Yeah. So that'd be one of the 7, and I'm happy to give one more for my fellow panelists, which is another. So that's like number 5 on my list. Number 6 on my list is, can you describe for me the learning curve of your system and where you think it's going to asymptote? So in most machine learning systems, a certain amount of data gets you a lot of the way to the performance, and then at some point, incremental data starts to produce smaller and smaller results. I generally want to ask, do you know the shape of that curve? Because if you do, you understand in your business when you should stop accumulating data, the relative value of a piece of data, and so forth. So maybe you could apply that to your company.
I don't have a Julia, but I have a blog post where we actually showed, because that's a very good question. Like, we often look at, can AI do, you say dog shit, the dog stuff, right? A dog sheepdogs. dogs are super cheap, they are easy to feed, and engineers are very expensive. So like building an AI to like shepherd dogs, like that might not be the best solution, and they might not do it as good as a dog, right? So in the space we are in, the way we look at it was, hey, let's look at the most basic data sets we can, and business rules. That's our like the baseline, and that gave us the baseline, and we said, let's now replace the business rules with AI and see if we can do better. And that was step number 2. And then let's add some data sources, and we can see at every data sources what the increment is, and then we can plot that curve. And we made a blog post to because we didn't have a Julia. Yeah.
So maybe, if I want to turn around to you lady investors, how do you do it? Like, do you have the same type of questions that you ask for, or what are you looking for in these new innovative projects that come about? Are you having the same filter as Phil here, or do you have a different one?
Are you asking, do we have a set of 7 questions to stump entrepreneurs?
Or more the filter by which you're going to look at why you think an AI project could be innovative and interesting for you?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, as a Series A focused venture firm, we have 250 investments, 27 have gone public. Our goal is to invest in businesses that get to 100 million in revenues to start, right? So that is the criteria. If it's AI driving it, if it's, I don't know, some other consumer trend driving it, I am all for any kind of options. So that is the number one piece of it. I think for companies that are leveraging technologies that are recently available, then we dig much deeper into how hard it is to build, what kind of defensibility is there around that particular technology. I recently invested in this fun company that actually the ladies will appreciate. That is a computer vision-based robot. Actually, you know what? Before that, do people know what eyelash extensions are? Phil, please explain to us what eyelash extension. Yeah, okay, all right. Well, I don't believe you guys. Let me tell you what eyelash extensions are. So women go to salons, right, and every single month and get 80-ish lashes extended, attached individually to their own lashes. It takes like an hour and a half, $200 per session, $2 billion spend per year in the US, fastest growing beauty trend. Ridiculous, right? So this is all done with technicians and manual labor and very expensive. And so when I met these 2 founders, one who ran a public robotics company and one who ran one of the largest Botox chains in the US, I was like, wow, these guys are going to build something really interesting. And this robot is able to do eyelash extensions automatically in 20 minutes, right, versus the hour and a half. And the reason why it's possible to do so today is because vision as a technology is good enough, right? This was not possible even 4 years ago. And so I invested in this company. It was super fun. The funniest part is explaining this to my partnership. It was silence. But anyhow, I think to your question, it's a matter of, is this a large market? Does this make sense? Do the entrepreneurs have founder market fit? And also, if it's AI driven, then why is it that it makes sense to use?
Yeah, I think it's interesting with the lash extension example. I like the way you're describing like the market and the fastest growing beauty trend. That's like totally something I've noticed, and something I've experienced as well with lash extensions. But I think one of the things we look for in AI kind of driven businesses is similarly like what's the answer to like the why now question? Like why is this happening now, and why does this like need AI? Like is the AI like a real advantage that matches the why now in this example? So one example I just provide from kind of our portfolio is we have an investment in a company called Standard Cognition, which is it's basically an Amazon Go competitor. So it's using computer vision to identify what you're buying. So if you walk into a standard store, you can just basically walk in and walk out because the cameras overhead are using computer vision to just identify what you're buying and automatically can check you out that way. The difference, of course, is that Standard Cognition is selling its technology to stores that are not Amazon only stores, and Amazon has not been doing that. I think it really, what drew us to that investment was not only was it like an interesting team, interesting technology, but it was also like really palpably strong, like why now? Having cashierless checkout is a real competitive advantage for stores. Like a consumer would rather go to a cashierless store than a store that has cashiers where they have to wait in line. It's like not as pleasant of an experience. And having an Amazon Go as a competitor in the space really has, lit the fire in the space in terms of like other grocers, department stores, convenience stores that are concerned about what that means for the industry. So I think that really there's a strong kind of market pull that has kind of ignited a lot of customer conversations on the adoption of that. Of the AI technology. So yeah, it's not just about the technology, but it's also like what is going on with the market that you're seeing that kind of market pull.
I'm sorry, this is a robot that pokes at your eyeball faster than a person would? That's the thing?
So Phil has not done an eyelash extension.
Not in years. I mean, I used to do it the old-fashioned way.
I can tell. Usually your lash is a little bit longer when I met you in 2008. But no, the robot actually doesn't touch your eyes at all. It only is long enough to touch your close to your eyelashes because it's holding a lash which touches your eyelashes. And the arm has a magnetic piece which if it feels any pressure it'll just fall off. So from a safety perspective, there's zero risk of it actually touching you. I'll put you in the alpha customer list.
This is, the one main takeaway I have here from the examples you're giving is that they're very different than what you read in the press. Like each time you read an article in the press around AI, it's all about sexy autonomous vehicles that are going to replace everything tomorrow. And all the examples that you're giving are very practical, down to earth. I would have never guessed that there was AI in eyelash extensions, to be quite honest, or in retail stores tomorrow, or in the scenario you described, Phil. So it's super interesting to see that. So is this kind of what you're seeing? There's a difference between where you can actually build a project or invest in, because these are actual down-to-earth practical things versus all the hype in the press. I don't know who wants to comment on that, but it would be great to hear a little bit more around that.
Well, I mean, I think what Phil's doing, what all of you are doing with All Turtles is right on and speaks very directly to this. I think one of the ways that I encourage people to spot areas where this could crop up is think about something that requires some level of thinking or analysis. So usually what requires you to do thinking or analysis are when there's variance, right? So like let's take eyelashes as our working example. Not everybody's eyelashes are in the same place. They don't have the same geometry and so forth. So there's like some level of thinking to align the extension to the lash, right? So number one, think about, is there something of analysis? Number two, is that type of analysis clearly defined and something that repeats, right? Critically, the problem has to repeat. So if it's every single question is a tabula rasa, totally new question that has no similarity between any of the instances, it's very hard to make an AI and machine learning solution for it. But if you have one that has some repetitive structure, but some degree of variance, and there's hopefully some way to accumulate some data around training, either experimentally or historically, bang, you've got the ability to do something. And that could be everything from eyelash extensions to weather predictions. In the case of Frog Labs, which we were talking about earlier, is a French company that's doing deep learning around the outcomes of weather, for example. Can I look and say where there's going to be a flood down the line in a few days based on some certain factors, or where a certain economic thing, or shopping or tourism based on weather. Anything that kind of has those prerequisites is pretty ripe for this type of thing.
So maybe one last question from me, and I'll direct it to you first, Phil, because you mentioned earlier that the problem space you were looking at, 5 years ago, the tech stack would have been the hard thing to do, and now it's no longer the case. So there's a lot of things in the technology stack, whether it's hardware or software, that are changing, that are making all these new initiatives possible. So would you mind commenting on which of the ones you think are going to be making the most impact and that you think you're going to rely on? Is it things like FPGA in the hardware, GPUs? Is it like new networks like 5G? What are the things that you think are going to be the biggest enablers of what you want to do?
Yeah, I think you can also turn that question around, right? Like, in fact, I think it's a little bit dangerous to start with a technology and say, what can we do with this technology, right? It's maybe better to start with the problem and, the problems that may have been there for a long time, and just constantly, every year or so, just kind of go through the list of problems that you wish someone would work on, but that for whatever reason weren't fixable, and say, like, is there anything that we can do about this now that we couldn't do before? I think, like, starting with the technological capabilities leads a lot of people to just waste their talents and their lives working on things that could be built instead of on things that should be built. I would really encourage people to start with the other thing around, like what should you make, and then why wasn't it made before? And if it was, then don't do it again. And if it wasn't, then ask why. And if you can come up with a really good reason that was true a few years ago but is no longer true, then that's like a very good signal to do it. And I can list some commonalities of the types of things that recent AI and tech advances have enabled, but I actually think doing that is a little bit dangerous because it's like too easy to like generalize from the technology and land in an area that frankly doesn't need to be made. Like, I don't know whether eyelash robots need to exist, but clearly they could be made now. Let me give you another example of a project that we're working on. It's a project called Tell Us, and it's meant for elder care. So it's this pretty amazing thing. It's a little magic box that you plug into a wall, and it automatically figures out the health status of people in the room, primarily meant for elderly people. It could determine if you're awake, asleep, how well you're sleeping, how you're walking, whether you're in danger of falling down. It could measure your heart rate, your breathing rate, all that stuff, with no wearables and no cameras or microphones, no privacy invading. So it's kind of this amazing thing for getting really actionable medical information to help keep elderly people at home longer and have better outcomes. The reason, if you were and it's using precision radar. So it has this sub-millimeter band radar, which basically sees every motion down to 1/10 of a millimeter, and is able to categorize what it is and says, oh, that's grandma's heartbeat, and here's how it's changing. So if you tried to do this a few years ago, it would have been insane. Because like 5 years ago, the actual radar would have been like the size of that chair. It would have cost about $100,000. But because there's been so many billions of dollars, I think something like $50 billion of investment in miniaturized radar for self-driving cars and for drones, now it used to cost $100K and used to be the size of like 2 of those chairs actually. Now it's like 1 chip, it costs $50. So we're taking that technology, which was developed entirely for different applications, which I think are actually less important. Like, I think autonomous vehicles are less important than using this for healthcare, and applying it to a problem that has always been there. Like, we've always had the problem of how do we take care of elderly people, and it's just more acute now. The other thing that if you tried to do this 5 years ago, you could never deal with is just processing that data. Imagine seeing everything that moves down to 1/10 of a millimeter in real time in a room. That's far more data. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to process it? Well, now both the ML stack and the edge computing models are good enough, and the embedded processors are fast enough where on the device we can actually do a lot of the categorization and figure out that's a human, that's the air conditioning, that kind of stuff, pass the rest of it onto the cloud, do the rest of the classification there, have that be very elastic. So as we get better at training things on the cloud, we can then push the compute down to the device, so we can trade off bandwidth versus CPU. Like, none of these things would have been like good enough 5 years ago to do it. They all are now. And so we can make this product, which just works and is kind of amazing. But then if we sat around and said, okay, what else can we do with radar and elastic edge computing and trainable ML stacks, we'd be in danger of coming up with a whole bunch of things that like could be built but not necessarily should be built. So we actually kind of like prevent ourselves from going down that path and really try to think about worthwhile problems first.
So do you think of a worthwhile problem, but then as you start looking at it, you don't find the right technology tools, will you pause? Or are you going to...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's there's always something that's worth solving, and if you can't make a big enough impact, then yeah, just don't do it and just go on to something else. But there's so much stuff that's solvable now for the first time ever. Like I would be shocked if you couldn't come up with something really epic and worth solving that would have been hard to do a few years ago.
So I agree with Phil in all seriousness. We also invested actually in a company called Safely You in the elderly care space. I did that deal a couple months ago. That's using computer vision to hopefully make care better for people. But to the point around customer pain, right? You brought up the question of should a computer vision driven robot that does eyelash extensions, should that exist? I have honestly never thought about this problem statement until I met this company, and I was like, wow, this is a really niche-seeming solution to this, and a very hard-to-build solution to this. But when I dug into it, which is the customer side, I realized that the dynamics are actually perfect for this because unlike other beauty salon-based services, people don't go to salons thinking, I'm going to get pampered by doing eyelash extension. People think this is a chore. And going there for 2 hours every single month is not a pleasant thing to do, right? I know this as a consumer. The other part of it is the labor is actually very high, you need very high precision. If you're going to use a tweezer to attach an eyelash, you got to be trained over 6 months to a year until you're proficient. So there is a labor shortage. If you ask salons, what is the biggest challenge for them to grow their business? They can't find enough people to do this. There's a massive labor shortage on this. And then there is a growing consumer demand for it, which is it's a subscription kind of demand, because if you see someone who has eyelash extensions and not, there's a huge difference, right? So it triggers all the right vanity things, and the demand is growing. So that's a dynamic in which I think automation makes sense. I'd say that, and the margins are incredibly high in this business. So would it make sense, in my opinion, for nail design automation? I would say no, because the dynamics of that industry doesn't fit this. The question around would a robot working with a human make people nervous, I think for sure. So we've polled thousands and thousands of consumers with this question. I would say 50% are hesitant, 50% are curious and interested. If you look at the evolution of, say, Botox, which is one of the co-founders who started this company, women or men were using needles to put in their faces to have no wrinkles, right? Like that is a much, much bigger barrier to penetrate versus a robot not touching you and putting in eyelash extensions. So anyhow, I agree. I was describing this for I think the statement that problems that are worth solving with automation being the right solution deserves to be solved in a big market, and problems that where automation could be one of the options probably isn't worth solving.
All right, so the prevailing view on the panel is start with an important problem and then find the right technology. I think I'll probably be maybe the vote in the other direction, which is some of these technological developments in the last few years are just so good and just so amazing for the field that I think they unlock possibilities that most people wouldn't have thought of before. So I'd say if there's two that I would add to Reza's question, it would probably be, top two would probably be pre-trained models and higher levels of abstraction. So what that means is, it used to be, let's say you wanted to do some really advanced image understanding work. It used to be, you kind of had to boil the ocean. You need thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of labeled training examples. You need to train them for ages and ages on really big systems. And then only then, once you've sort of understood how to look at the entire world, you can figure out where an eyelash is as your last step in your process, right? That's sort of an oversimplification, but basically you'd have to make very good general purpose vision models, often be good at individual tasks. These days, anybody in this room who has a laptop with them can go and download really good pre-trained models made by big organizations and open source projects that are better than the best thing you could possibly have hoped to have done even a few years ago. And then you just have to bolt on at the end the training that's particular to your task. So that's number one. Number two is abstractions. So in the world of computer science, think about something like memory management. You know you've got RAM in your computer. When you write a program, you don't have to think about like which exact, most people, for most programs, don't have to think about which exact piece of memory you're sending like each piece of information to and how you're conducting that. You just have a higher level abstraction in, let's say, an object-oriented programming language where you just say, make an object that has this, do these operations on it, and just something beneath it just does it, right? And as a result, there are so many more programmers today that can work fruitfully and quickly than you could when you had to work in assembly many decades ago, right? Similarly, there are machine learning frameworks where now a model that you would have had to write by hand that would have been hundreds or thousands of lines of code is just like one call on a class. So you just say, instantiate a model that does this, next line train it, next line test it. It can be that simple. And what that means is the universe of people that feel that machine learning is an accessible technology to solve their problem has expanded dramatically, and then thereby you bring more people into the tent that can address their problems.
Sorry, I think that's a waste of talent. I think like people who are talented enough and have the, privileged enough to have the education and the resources to do this, the world would be better off if they were actually using that talent for solving real problems rather than starting with what kind of neat thing can I do and then hoping to stumble onto a problem that way. Of course, you could do it both ways, but like frankly, it is not super common in the world right now to have people that know how to do this, that have that even have a laptop, that can go and get this pulled off. And like, it would be somewhat better if those people were working on substantive problems in the world and not just playing around with stuff. Maybe after the age of 12 or something. Like it's time when it's time to like get serious. Like, start with the problems first. So yeah, I'm kind of a nerd myself. So I spend a lot of time in my life just fucking around with things, seeing what's interesting, and it's less fun but more satisfying to like start with the problems.
Maybe a final comment from you, Sam, as the entrepreneur between the two, and then we'll open it up to the floor.
I'm going to tell you who is right. No, just I had a strong opinion, not about like starting with a problem or starting with the technology. It's more around what we need right now in AI. When there was this thing about the eyelashes. The first question was, holy moly, we're going to have an AI poke at my eyes. That's the biggest challenge I see today is trust. Trust in AI. And I think there's two components of it. One is, my dentist, for example, was like working on my teeth, and they have super sharp object they put in your mouth, and she's talking to her friend while she's doing this. And I'm like a bit tense because I have, if she like goes wrong, like it's pretty bad, right? I don't have so much trust. But if it was a machine, an AI, that would be doing that, I think I would be even more freaked out, right? We see that with self-driving cars. I mean, they drive. I'm a bad driver. My wife always makes fun of me. An AI is much better driver than me, but you would trust me better, and I would drive you. It would be okay. You would be conscious about AI. And with our customers, we have the same thing. You make a single mistake, and then this is over. Like the trust is gone, and now you lose the trust forever. And in terms of AI and research, it's not faster GPUs, faster memories, faster systems. What we've been like working a lot on, and we'd love more help from academics and from like other companies, is the process and the management systems to ensure that AI doesn't make mistakes. That we have predictability. So every time, for example, on the eyelashes, let's say it's 20 minutes today, you find a way to make it 15 minutes. When you're going to make that change in that firmware so that it makes the eyes better, I mean, if I'm a data scientist, I will be so freaked out that there is, like in Arizona, like there is a mistake somewhere, and now like you don't want to touch it, right? You're like, okay, it works pretty okay, but don't touch it. And today it's what it feels. Like we make models for like hundreds of customers, and every update that we make, we need to have very strict checks and control to make no mistake. So we'd love more help and innovation in that area.
So I'm going to open it up to the floor and see if you guys have any questions to ask from the audience. Thank you, Blake, for passing the mic.
Phil, do you have any problems that you see that are not currently solvable by today's technology, but you have your eyes on as things move forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I think if you look at the main problem spaces in the world, it's at the meta level, it's inequality and wasted potential, I think, are the kind of the two big ones. I don't think anyone's going to solve inequality and wasted potential, but I think you can kind of decompose them into several, sub-problems that you can attack. There's a lot. I've kind of got this framework of, I mentioned it briefly before, of like what are the monsters that are like in plain sight? Meaning, what are the things that like we all kind of know about? We've just like, for whatever reason, we're not rushing out to do them because we're just kind of used to letting them be that way. There's a lot of that in healthcare, a lot, right? Like the world is having really bad outcomes right now because of kind of metabolic-related diseases, right? It's diabetes, obesity, lots of types of heart disease, lots of types of cancer. Pretty much everything that the U.S. government has said about this in the past 60 years has been exactly wrong, like 180 degrees wrong, and that's affected billions of people in the world. And there's a chance to fundamentally solve that starting soon using some new understanding about how metabolism works, new generation of wearable devices, a lot of AI to actually pull data together and do recommendations. That's not being done well enough. We're starting to work on a couple of things in that space, but I'd love to see a ton more people doing it. There's a huge problem. There's a huge problem that I think is becoming really apparent, which is it's not clear whether democracy is compatible with the internet. And if you had to choose one or the other, it's not clear which you would choose. Like, I'm not sure if I had to pick democracy or the internet, which one I would pick. But I'm kind of not ready to give up on the fact that maybe they can be made compatible. So I would love to see a lot more work. We've got one small project in that area about how do we make, as you said, how do we restore people's trust? Like, how do we actually get it so that democracy, which kind of by definition is getting some people to consensus around something, is something that works again, because it's just fundamentally broken right now by the internet. These are the kinds of things that I think are like very significant problems that are just starting to be worked on seriously, but no one's made a big dent out of them yet. And I hope that it happens soon. Yeah. So I have a question actually that I'd like to ask. It's kind of a filter to yours, to an entrepreneur. You can ask. So, are you going to build this using blockchain or the blockchain? And yeah, and of course, either answer, you just walk away completely and ignore them. But I like to phrase it that way. Yeah. Try asking. Is it blockchain or the blockchain? Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Well, I'd like to thank you guys all for participating in the panel. There's still some drinks and food left. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for participating. Thank you.